I recently hosted a fireside chat with three state privacy regulators: Kash Chand out of the New Jersey Attorney General's office, John Eakins from Delaware, and Michelle Lucan from Connecticut. It wasn't a presentation or fancy slides. It was a solid hour of a true roundtable discussion, sharing what each of the regulators are seeing firsthand and what their state expects companies to be doing. Oftentimes, we hear that regulators collaborate and work together. It was so apparent that this group really is on speed dial with each other. And just like privacy pros build community to learn from each other, regulators do that too. We were reminded by a personal story Kosh shared. Regulators are just people who use the same apps we do and get frustrated by the same broken out buttons. It's like when a kid sees a teacher at the grocery store or Target. Wait, teachers are real people too? Yep, same situation here. Regulators use the same websites and apps as the consumers they are trying to protect because they are consumers. I took a lot of notes. There was too much for one newsletter topic, honestly, so this is going to be long and it's hard to cram it all in here. Five things kept surfacing, and I think every one of them belongs in your operational checklist, not just your policy binder. For starters, privacy offices are growing. New Jersey has the biggest team of the three. Kosh described his data privacy and cybersecurity section as a rather big team with 12 attorneys, one part-time attorney, and two paralegals. Connecticut has grown steadily but stayed leaner. Michelle said she started with just two of us on the privacy team, and they're now up to six attorneys, plus a legal investigator and a paralegal, with the team no doubt continuing to grow. She also noted Connecticut doesn't have a technologist yet, but will be looking for one soon. Delaware is smaller still. John called it a small team as a small state. Probably not surprising that we have a smaller team than Kosh. The one thing sets Delaware apart: a team member who works as a technologist with a PhD in computer science. Nobody's asking for perfect. Michelle said this almost verbatim, that they're not looking for perfection. What they want is evidence that a company took the law seriously and made a documented good faith effort to comply. When Connecticut sends an inquiry, they're not just asking about the one issue that triggered it. They're asking for the privacy program, the notices, the internal policies, the data protection assessments. John made the point even sharper. They want to see decisions documented when they were actually made, not reconstructed after the fact once a letter shows up. Cash put it plainly too. They want to understand why you chose one path over another and whether you've gone back and reevaluated that choice as your data practices changed. I've said this is like in school, where showing your work on how you solved the math problem is important, not just the answer. It's quite possible that a regulator might not agree. However, understanding the thought process and documentation is factored into the analysis. Here's the part I didn't expect. Both Kosh and Michelle talked about how much worse it gets when a company seems evasive. Kosh describes seeing less cooperative responses lately, with companies being less transparent about what actually happened on their systems, which just drags the investigation out and makes it more contentious. Michelle agreed. Vague one-sentence answers don't protect companies. They just slow everything down and make the office dig harder. Neither office is going to walk away from a matter without a clear picture of what happened, so stonewalling doesn't really avoid the outcome. Kosh shared a story that one time outside counsel asked him why he even cared about a case, since he thought he wouldn't be there in 3 years when it was resolved. His answer is that these offices are built to outlast any one person on either side of the table. So playing a long game against them isn't really a strategy. And 7 years later, Kosh is still there. None of that requires a flawless program. It requires a paper trail. If the privacy decisions live in someone's memory instead of somewhere written down, that's the gap to close first, and it's usually the less expensive one to fix. Kosh reminded companies that consumers need to be able to change their decisions. He shared that he once personally made an opt-in choice on his phone and found reversing it to be far more complicated than agreeing to provide his data. He also flagged a pattern he's seeing. Some companies, after you opt out, show you a banner warning that you won't get the best version of the site. He said that starts to look like a dark pattern too, because it breaks the symmetry between opting in and opting out. Michelle reminded companies that if you're going to have a cookie banner, it needs to be symmetrical. One step to opt in, then it can't be multiple steps to opt out. I continue to see this all the time. We recently went through a batch of consumer apps and websites, and they had no way to change your choice once you made it. You picked one, and that was it. Gone. And in other newsletters, I've highlighted the most common cookie consent challenges. John and Michelle both flagged the same failure mode from the other direction. Companies build an opt out mechanism, flip it on, and consider the job done. But a mechanism that exists isn't the same as a mechanism that works. Connecticut ran a joint sweep with California and Colorado last fall, specifically testing whether universal opt out signals, which sidebar led to an entire discussion on what we're calling this now. The general agreement was oops, were actually being honored across a company system. The investigation revealed some companies honored the signal while others did not. And regulators reminded us they have technical tools to test these opt outs. Selling the data doesn't end the company's responsibility for it. This one might be the biggest shift happening. For years, a lot of companies treated data sharing agreements as something you only needed for EU data. Regulators had strong opinions on why companies need to have data sharing agreements in place. For example, Delaware's newest amendments spell out exactly when you need a contract and due diligence for those transfers. New Jersey took it further with its data broker registry law, which was talked about briefly, and that could be an entire webinar on its own. Companies that collect data and then sell or share it with unrelated third parties would need to register and disclose what opt-outs they honor and how. Michelle reminded us that privacy rights belong to the person, not the device or the platform. They're not something that resets every time your data moves somewhere new. If your company shares data across an ad tech ecosystem or a network of partners, the expectation is that a person's choice follows them through the whole environment, not just the part of if you build it yourself. If you don't have a clean map right now of who you share data with and what's in those contracts, that's a fix before someone asks you for it on a really quick deadline. A stale privacy notice is a warning light, not a paperwork issue. There were a lot of comments here about privacy notices. John pointed to a red flag he sees constantly, opening a privacy notice and finding last updated March 2024, which is a huge hint that there are other issues. Every state privacy law requires the notice to actually inform people what their rights are, and they are seeing things constantly. Companies listing the wrong states and companies hedging with language like, you may have certain rights. John was pretty direct that hedging doesn't cut it. Saying a consumer may have a right doesn't actually tell a Delaware resident whether they have one. In his words, that's almost its own dark pattern. You're making someone go research their own state's law just to find out if the rights you're describing even apply to them. He'd rather every Delawarean knew the law existed, but they don't. So the notice is the one place that's supposed to make it clear. He also pushed on something a lot of companies don't think about. It's not just your website. Mobile apps and other connected devices carry the same obligations. If you're dropping an SDK into your app, you need to know exactly where that data goes because that's an area his office is actively looking at right alongside websites. Michelle backed this up from the Connecticut side. Privacy notices, she said, are low-hanging fruit for her office. She's still seeing notices that don't mention Connecticut's law at all or only reference California's 3 years into CTDPA enforcement. Her words were that this is an inexcusable issue at this point. And if the public-facing notice is that far off, there's an assumption that there's more wrong underneath it. Because if a company can't get the one document meant for consumers right, the internal work is unlikely to be in better shape. Regulators say it plainly. These are the easy to spot issues that send them looking for the harder, more technical violations underneath. Sensitive data, profiling, and kids are where all three offices are leaning in hardest. We didn't originally plan to spend much time here, but it came up enough that it deserves its own section. Michelle walked through where Connecticut's law has gotten stronger. Residents now have the right to opt out of profiling, and profiling was just redefined more broadly. It used to mean solely automated decision-making. Now it covers any automated processing that produces a legal or similarly significant effect, which is an expanded right. Residents can also contest the results of a profiling decision. and businesses have to run impact assessments on any profiling activity. If you handle Connecticut residents' data and haven't looked at your profiling practices against this, that's worth doing now. Kosh talked about New Jersey's approach, which is aggressive. The data broker registry law effectively prohibits sharing sensitive data for profiling purposes. His office is co-leading litigation against Meta with California, Colorado, and Kentucky, and has separately sued TikTok and Discord. A lot of this is aimed at protecting the 13 to 17 age group, which COPPA doesn't cover. New Jersey now requires opt-in consent to use that age group's data for profiling or targeted advertising. New Jersey also just passed a law addressing surveillance pricing, looking at how profiling of both kids and adults can affect something as basic as what someone pays for groceries. John described Delaware's amendments as moving in the same direction. They banned the sale of sensitive data outright. Delaware was also the first state back in 2023 to extend its age protections to include 16 and 17-year-olds, specifically, not just kids under 13. The newer amendments expand what counts as sensitive data too, covering nearly all health-related data and for the first time, writing directly into statute that an inference used to place someone into a sensitive category counts as sensitive data itself. Colorado already does this by regulation, but John said most people in his line of work already treated inferences this way. The amendment is really just making that explicit. Reminder that the age ranges are not the same state to state. New Jersey said 13 to 17. Other states say 13 to 16. Either companies have to take a conservative approach to treat all teens the same at the strictest requirements possible, or check state by state and build operations to accommodate the differences. If you want a deeper resource, Michelle pointed people toward Connecticut's own advisories on this. The Attorney General's office keeps a page with all of Connecticut's enforcement reports, FAQs, and guidance specifically on privacy notices and honoring global privacy control. It's worth a look, even if you're not a Connecticut-only company, since a lot of what they're flagging shows up across every state law modeled the same way. Every one of these issues comes back to the same idea. Trust and compliance aren't two separate goals. A notice people can actually read, an opt-out that holds up when you test it, a vendor relationship you can explain in plain terms. It's not just about avoiding an enforcement letter, it's what makes people trust you with their data in the first place. Before we even got into any of this, I opened the session with a poll asking what people's organization's biggest privacy challenge was right now. 35% of companies picked turning requirements into operational processes more than any other answer as the challenge. Keeping up with changing regulations came in second, and prioritizing with limited resources came in third. This result doesn't surprise me at all. We love helping companies operationalize their privacy programs. It's what we do all day, every day. And it's exactly why everything in this newsletter is written the way it is. Companies need to create programs that support the requirements states expect, like documented decisions, not stale notices, and sometimes opt-in consent for teens data. Operationalizing all of these requirements call for repeatable processes. This is what we're doing all day for our clients, operationalizing privacy. We've taken our approach and created more than 24 downloadable guides and templates built to help companies cover topics like privacy notices, cookie governance, data inventories, training, program management, and more. And you can grab whatever piece you need at redcloveradvisors.com. If you need more than just the guides, we'll walk alongside you to help with full service implementations. Just send me a note, we'll schedule a consultation, or visit redcloveradvisors.com. We're so grateful that you are continuously listening, and thank you so much.